Hello, good day to one and all. This is Miss A. Krishna Sundar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, KAHM Unity Women's College, Mancheri. Today, we are going to discuss the chapter titled as 50 Years of Malayalam Cinema, written by V.C. Harris. Now, this is actually a chapter from the book Readings on Kerala, which is prescribed for second semester General English students. So, before we step into the essay, a few things about the writer V.C. Harris. Now, V.C. Harris was born in Mayari, which is actually closer to Mahi region. He is known as a teacher, thinker, and critic. Theatre and cinema were his fields of interest. Now, he was a constant presence in IFFK. So, coming to the chapter, what is this essay about? Now, this essay actually traces 50 years of Malayalam cinema, commencing from the year 1954 with the release of the movie Neelakuil, and the essay ends with a movie which came in the year 2003, which again is a Malayalam movie, Padam Onnu Oru Vilavam. So, in fact, this essay is actually discussing 50 years of Malayalam film industry, and it begins in the year 1954 and it ends with the year 2003. Now, this means this is actually the time period or the time span that V.C. Harris is considering to discuss how cinema evolved in Malayalam industry. So, to start with, he begins by stating that Kerala has always had a specific history in the making of cinema. Now, when you consider all the other Indian states, Kerala always had remained as a different state. And V.C. Harris says that this could be because of the socio-political history that Kerala always upheld. Now, if we look at Kerala, the formation of Kerala actually happened in the year 1956. And see, the first movie that V.C. Harris is talking about is a movie which got released in the year 1954, and the movie is Neelakuil. Now, before the formation of Kerala, Kerala was actually divided into 3 territories. We can see one was Travancore, then comes Cochin, and then comes Malabar. And since all these 3 territories used one particular language as a common language, which is actually Malayalam language, these 3 territories were put together and Kerala as a state was formed in the year 1956. So he's just going through the history of Kerala. And what happened to Kerala after Indian independence? Because there was nationalist movement which was very much present everywhere. More than that, Kerala was affected by left ideology as well. So nationalist movement and left ideology soon after independence too had influenced Kerala, and this has definitely influenced Malayalam industry, the Malayalam movie industry as well. So moving on to the movies, now V.C. Harris is actually giving a trajectory of Malayalam movies ranging from the 1950s till 2000. The first movie, 1954 movie Neelakuil, and the last movie that is under discussion is the movie that came out in the year 2003, Padam Onnu Oru Vilavam. So, in short, if you read the text might look a bit difficult for you to grasp and to understand. So, the easy way is to remember the line of movies that V.C. Harris is discussing in this chapter. So, it begins with the movie Neelakuil in 1950s. Now, you can see the poster of the movie here. Now, Satyan actually plays the lead role, and his character name is Sridharan Nair. Now, Sridharan Nair, who is coming from an upper class family, falls in love with a Dalit lady named as Neeli. Now, the story goes like this: they fall in love with each other, and Neeli finally gets pregnant. But Sridharan Nair, considering the current scenario of class caste distinction, is not willing to get married to Neeli. So he finally gets married to another girl, another lady from his own community, and Neeli is left out. Now, Neeli, the Dalit woman, dies in her childbirth. So, till this point, the movie actually sounds very tragic. But one thing that was very modern about the movie is that at the end of the movie, it is noticed that Sridharan Nair, who got married to a lady from his own community, is actually childless. And finally, he accepts his own child in the relationship with Neeli. So, if you look at the ending of this movie, it's slightly modern in nature, because you cannot think about this kind of a movie, and that too in the year 1950, when class caste distinctions were very much rampant, and accepting a Dalit woman's baby was something which could be considered as slightly modernistic in nature. And therefore, V.Z. Harris says that this could be considered as a period of optimism, because there was some kind of an enthusiasm working in the air. And he also says that Neelakuil has been considered as a landmark film in Malayalam industry. And the reason that he states here is that because it fused for the very first time a variety of ingredients, something that is truly local, a well crafted story, distinct engagement with caste inequality, progress, construction of modern secular subject. Along with that, it had good film music, drawing from folk traditions, and a series of stars and technicians. So, considering all these elements, Neelakuil is considered as a landmark movie in the history of Malayalam cinema. But all said and done, though V.C. Harris claims that this was a period of optimism with enthusiasm in the air and had slight elements of modernity, there was something which was still relevantly going on, and that was actually the patriarchal ideology. Because this is a movie in the 1950s, and you cannot actually think about a highly different story here. So, patriarchal ideology was something which could be seen even in this movie. Now, moving on to the 1960s, the most important movie that came out was Chemmin. And I'm sure all of you might have heard of this movie name. And you can see the poster here. Sheila was actually the character, Karutama, and Madhu doing the character of Parikuti. And then there is Karutama's husband, whose character name is Palani. Now, if you look at this movie, you can see it's a tragedy. Now, Karutama falls in love with Parikuti, but finally she gets married to another local fisherman from her own community. Now, there is a founding logic on which the entire story is based, because the movie says that the safety of the fishermen at sea depended on their wife's chastity and loyalty at home. Because if the wife is not really loyal to her husband, the husband, who's the fisherman who has gone to the sea, will not come back. He will be consumed by Kadalamma. That was exactly what this logic suggested. Now, it's exactly the same thing that comes in the movie as well. Karutama is married to Palani now, but she reinvents her love story with Parikuti later, and finally it's a tragedy. You can see all the characters dead. So, according to V.Z. Harris, 1960s was a period of discontent and disappointment. Now, this is a great difference between 1950s and 1960s. 1950s, it is considered as a period of optimism, whereas 1960s, it is considered as a period of disappointment. Again, if you look at this movie, patriarchal ideology still remains here as well, because it is dependent. The life and death of a man is dependent on the chastity of his woman. So that is why we say patriarchal ideology was very common in all these movies. So moving on to the next one, coming to 1970s. Okay, so we covered 1950s, 1960s. Now we are coming to 1970s. One of the movie that is considered here is Swayamvaram. And Swayamvaram was a movie by Adur Gopalakrishnan, and this actually talks about middle class society, the intermixing of tradition and modernity, family, sexuality, all these elements were taken into consideration. So you can see the poster of the movie here. Now the story goes like this. Vishwam, the character role played by Madhu again, and Sita, the role that is played by Sharada. They fall in love with each other and they elope, leaving their families. Now eloping and starting a new life was something which was not very common in the 1970s, and that is why it is considered as a movie which is different from others. And they try to lead a new life, but unfortunately there is unemployment, poverty. Finally, she gives birth to a child, but at the end of the story the husband dies, Vishwam dies, and there are people who are actually imploring Sita by telling that she should get back to her home, but she denies, and that is where the story ends. So you can see this was slightly different from the common tradition, and unemployment, poverty, these elements were also touched upon. Now, there is another movie that is mentioned that comes in the year 1978. It means it's again a movie which comes in the same time period, and the title of the movie is Thampu. Now, this was also considered as a period of discontent and disappointment, but at the same time, some new themes were actually coming into movies. Now, what happens in this movie, Thampu? Now, this is actually the story of a village, and there is the arrival of a circus troupe in a village. Now, with the circus troupe coming to the village, there is a sudden change of lifestyle happening in the village. People are trying to become more fashionable, more modern, but ultimately, after a couple of months, the circus troupe, they leave the village, and finally, the people get back to their normal life. So, the element of resilience, the ability to recover in connection with the village people is actually something what has been portrayed here. So moving on to another movie during the 1970s, it was a movie which came out in the year 1973, Nirmalyam. Now you can see the poster here. Now this was a movie which talked about religion, ritual, degeneration and social change. And maybe this is something which can really talk about a kind of degeneration that happens in connection with religious issues. Now, as you can see in the poster, it is a story of an oracle. Now, oracle in Malayalam is actually Velichapadu. So he is the one, the main protagonist, and he is so much devoted to the idol in the temple, but ultimately he loses everything. He loses his daughter elopes with somebody, his son is unemployed, and even his own wife goes to the extent of prostitution because there is no money coming into the family. So finally, he actually resents the god or the goddess that he worshipped, and he spits on the idol. So this was something which people could not accept during the 1970s, and that is the reason why this movie has been taken into consideration. So it is the fall of an oracle, that is a story that is mentioned here. Now, soon after this comes another important period in the history of India, that is the emergency period which came during the period of Indira Gandhi in the year 1975. So now we are discussing another movie after the emergency period, that is in 1986, Amma Ariyan. So you can see this is a poster of the movie. Now, the story here is very simple because it actually captures the revolutionary spirit which worked in Kerala. And the story is how a group of people actually travel to report the death of a son to his mother. So this is actually the storyline, but it actually talks about police, Naxalite group, revolution, all these things actually come into this during the 1980s. Now, after 1980s, there was a sudden change everywhere. Liberalization was happening, privatization was happening, globalization was happening, and generally movies started speaking about the minorities like Dalits, Adivasis, women, etc. Now, again, V.C. Harris suggests that, again, Kerala is very different from other states because it stands highest in the social welfare index. And the reason is that there is total literacy, low birth rate, population is comparatively less, good health care, low infant mortality rates, and good working condition. But in bracket, he says there is one bad thing that is happening: the number of suicide rates. They remain highest in Kerala. So, apart from all these things, what we can see here is that during the period of late 1980s and 1990s, commercialization was happening because movies were not produced for the sake of art. It was produced for money making or profit making. So commercialization happened, and if you analyze the 1990s movies, to a certain extent this is true because most of the movies, they go in the very same channel portraying the same kind of story, but that was exactly what people wanted, and money actually flew in. So from late 1980s onwards, this commercialization began. But in between, there are some movies that V.C. Harris is noting. One is the 1999 movie Vanaprastham, which is again a Mohanlal movie. And the next one that he is mentioning is the 2003 movie Padamunnu Oru Vilapam. Now, this is a movie which actually talks about the story of a young Muslim girl, who was in her 10th standard. But despite her interest in studies, she is compelled or she is pushed into a marriage which she actually doesn't like. And she is married to a man who is already a divorced man who is older than her. And finally, in this marriage, the man molests her and he brings her back to her home and leaves her. Now, the character name of the storyline here is Shahina, and the role is actually played by Meera Jasmine. So Shahina is actually happy when her husband leaves her because she thinks that she can go back to the school and she can continue her studies. But unfortunately, she realizes that she is already pregnant, and again, it becomes a stumbling block in her life ahead. So this is where the story stops, and this actually talks about the condition of a young Muslim girl. Now, V.C. Harris also adds that Muslim representation was always problematic when we talk about Malayalam film industry. And in the very last part, he is actually discussing something which is very different. He talks about film songs. And he says that initially most of these songs were region based, which means they were basically regional, which means one song which comes from a particular region can be understood only by those people in that region. People from different localities would not be able to understand that. So this is how film music actually emerged. But he says later film music evolved into a different span where it could bring all the Malayalis together. And this actually created a public sphere. Now, a public sphere means every Malayali could actually enjoy the music that was produced in a movie. So this was a change which came in film songs. So with this, we come to the end of the chapter. So thank you very much for your patient listening. Thank you once again. In case if you have any queries or suggestions or anything else that needs to be explained a bit more, please feel free to connect with me. So thank you all once again. Thank you.